Hi, I'm Tia,
And I'm Toni.
and this is Emotions Unscripted. How has your week been?
It was a pretty busy week. Just trying to maintain balance, rest. What about you? How's your week?
It's been busy too. This was it this past weekend or the weekend before? I don't even know. I always said like time's not real. Who knows? But I ended up taking my daughter up to College Station to go to her friend's house, and it's about an hour and a half drive. And so we were just in the car and we were talking. And one of the things that she was telling me was because they were going to a homecoming at PV. And so going, they were all like communicating back and forth. And she kept getting phone calls and she's texting people. And she's like, I swear I'm the responsible one in this group. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. I was like, that's how I raised you. I raised you to be very kind of, like free. I was very like a free range parenter. You go out there, you learn that type of stuff. I didn't shelter you in the way that other people shelter their kids. And so you learned how to do a lot of things. And then I was like, oh, and you're a Cancer. Aren't you like the mother of the zodiac or whatever? And so you have that nurturing type of placement anyways. And then she goes and tells me, she's like, yeah, you did good with that, but because of you, I don't know how to express my emotions. And I was like, ouch. But then I was like, yeah, you're right. Because I was like, because I push everything down. And that's, well, I don't say I push everything down. I was like, I'm not very expressive with my emotions. And she was like, yeah, she's like, so I didn't know what to do with my emotions. And so mine just kind of come up and they explode. And then I'm mad because they exploded. And then I'm sad because I was mad. And then it's like a cycle all over again whenever I have emotions. And I was like, yeah, I don't get that. And so I was able to acknowledge like that's where I was. And even like as a parent, I had to think all the time about how am I teaching them something that doesn't even really come natural to me.
Hmm.
And so that's where my mind was. And so I was looking more into, my big three and how that kind of tells me so much about how I am in terms of my emotions. And with me being like all earth signs, Virgo, Capricorn, Taurus, I always used to tell people, yeah, I'm dead inside or I'm hell on wheels, that type of stuff. But in reality, it's not 100% true.
Yeah, for sure. I know for like forever, like when I started getting into like zodiac signs and stuff like that, my sun sign is Sagittarius, but like a casual, I thought that that was the only thing existed. And I would read about Sagittarius and they love to travel and they're this and they're that. And I'm like, yeah, kind of, but like my sun sign just never resonated with me. But when I really got into it a lot more and I learned about the big three and I learned about my rising sign, it like literally changed my whole life.
Hmm. And what's your rising?
So my rising sign is Gemini rising. And Geminis are very expressive. They look very young. And I was like, okay, that completely resonates because I've always gotten, I've looked very young. Gemini risings also talk with their hands. I definitely talk with my hands, very animated, very bubbly. And what I've learned by like learning astrology over time is that you actually grow into some of your signs. So I was like, oh, that's why Sagittarius never resonated. And so my sun is Sagittarius, rising is Gemini, and my moon sign Aquarius. And your moon sign represents your emotions, it represents your eternal world. It also represents the relationship that you had with your mother. So it's like astrology is so amazing because you can learn so much about yourself and your upbringing. Aquarius is very detached, so I can detach and just cut people off very easily. So it's just amazing. And I think a lot of times people, like casual people, like looking at zodiac signs, they're only into their sun sign and they use it as law. Like this
Mhm.
is what's going to happen. And it's like you really have to understand your sun, moon, rising. You have to understand your Venus, your Mars. Like you really have to like look at your whole chart. And I always tell people like it's just a tool And the tool is how you use it, and you just use tools. You don't allow tools to like take over your whole life.
Hmm. And I always saw it as this is the blueprint, but you can always alter the blueprint. And so I always see it about creating balance. So it's like, yeah, you came into the world this way, but you can balance yourself out a little bit and fall more to a place that's more comfortable or that works better for you. And then I was thinking also about how you were saying you kind of grow into your signs. And I really see that when I'm looking at my kid's birth chart and I'm like reading through and I was like, that's not them or that's not them. But they haven't had enough like lived experience for me to really see that. And I also don't know what they're feeling on the inside or what they're thinking on the inside. I just see the outside portrayal.
Mhm. For sure. And you know, with each zodiac sign, wherever it is in your chart, there's a higher expression and a lower expression. So what they say is basically, um, you know, we've had different lifetimes and we've mastered certain zodiac signs. So when we come in this lifetime, our south node is the things that we've mastered. So my south node is in Libra. So relationships come very easy to me. My north node is like where I'm going, my purpose. That's in Aries. And it depends on what house it's in. So, really knowing that this is literally a journey. So, even though you have a blueprint, it's like it's a little bit of the cheat code, but it's like you still have to do the work. But I love how there's a lower and a higher expression. Like, for example, a Gemini, like lower expression, maybe someone that's scattered brain, maybe referred to as two faced, never get anything done, indecisive, but a higher expression may be someone that is very skilled with their expression, very gifted, very intellectual people person. So that's another thing that I people. That's another thing people don't really notice that there is that high vibe and that low vibe.
Hmm. Yeah, I always, it makes me think about my son because he's a Virgo son too. And I was like, you're a fake Virgo. I was like, I'm not resonating with this. I'm like, I don't understand why you're so emotional. I don't understand why you don't think so highly of yourself. Because me, I'm over here. I'm like, I'm great. I'm perfect. I think so highly of myself. Ew, what are those emotions? And I was like, you're broken. Something's wrong with you.
And see, like to Virgo, like a high vibe would be organized, clean, visionary, but then a low vibe might be very critical of yourself or others, or very harsh, or too truthful. So it's like a sword with two edges. It's like on one end, it's like you may be this thing and have these good qualities, but on the other side, it's like, okay, these are the things you have to work through. And I see it as a scale, and we're somewhere along the scale, and we just have to bring balance to like our planets or our signs in our birth chart.
Yeah. What I think about Virgos and how we have these rock solid kind of exteriors and we kind of just go through kind of emotionless, but inside we're very sensitive, we're very critical of ourselves and things like that. And one of the things that I try to work on is being more authentic. And in being more authentic, that critical side, that sensitive side needs to come up. And that's why I go back to like creating that balance of like, you don't want to, or I don't want to always walk through life with this hard exterior, because people see me as like super masculine. And I was like, no, soft, delicate flower too. But nobody knows that because I just walk around with this shell around me. And I was like, I want to break out of that shell and show y'all a little bit more of what's on the inside.
Yeah, and you really highlight a good point. I know we're talking about zodiac signs, but even like the masculine and feminine energy, that has to be balanced as well. If you're too much of this or too much of that. So it's like when we're around different people in our day to day, like characters, it's like they're going to show us different things so we can work on each of our planets or each of our zodiac signs. That's all that all of these people are in our lives, or just to see how can you create more balance? How can you master these signs?
Yeah, with the masculine and feminine energy, I always think about it was this time when I was going back out into the dating world, and this is probably my early 30s or yeah, probably my early 30s. No, it was my late 20s. One time or somewhere around there. And I was going back into the dating world and I was like, I want a certain type of guy. And so I was like, I have to be more delicate. And so I remember I was talking to this one guy and I kept sitting there. Well, like before, like we even went out, and then like throughout the whole date, I'm sitting there like, "You're a delicate flower. You're a delicate flower." And so I'm trying to tell myself to like soften yourself, soften yourself. But I was like, it's hard. It's a hard kind of balance when it's like I've lived so much of my life being a certain way, and then I even think about like the way I was raised. My parents raised these strong independent women, and so I feel so much masculinity. And I think even like my signs are very, like the nature of my signs, my big three are very can be very masculine too. And so I'm like, gosh, I really have to practice to be able to show up more soft.
Yeah, and I think that maybe looking at like where your Venus is at is really helpful. Venus shows like how you want to be loved and how you love.
Mhm.
I think my Venus is in Scorpio, so it's like in the underworld, so
Mhm.
it's a little bit more dark.
Mine's
um,
a Leo.
okay, so yeah, so it's very like expressive and um, even with like your love language as well, I feel like everything is so layered. It's like everything is so layered and everything's so connected because I think about astrology, I think about love language, I think about masculine, feminine energy, like everything's connected and I feel like everything is definitely a tool to get you to the point where you can move along this journey with ease.
It's kind of like when I'm working with clients. I was recently thinking, I was like, man, I wish I could get like their time of birth and their birthplace, because even if they don't use it or I don't introduce it to them, it gives me so much more insight of what they do with things, how they approach life. And I was like, I'll be sitting there in session. I'm like, I wonder what their moon sign is. I wonder what their moon sign is. I was like, because they're not really portraying much of what I know their sun sign is. Usually I know that because we have their birth dates. But I was like, they're not feeling very Leo-ish. I wonder what that moon sign is or something.
Exactly. And you bring up a good point because really when we see our clients, we're seeing their rising sign. We're seeing how they present. Like I'm talking with my hands right now. Like we're seeing how they're presenting. So a lot of times you present as your rising sign. I think as a therapist, I'm always interested to know like where my client's Chiron is, like what house it's in, because it's like that's like the wounded healer. And a lot of times in therapy, that's what we're working through. We're working through those wounds and also their moon sign, like you said, because then I'm gonna know their interaction or their relationship with their mother. Was their mother nurturing? Were they detached? So it's like astrology would provide us with so many like little tips
Hmm.
for our sessions.
Yeah, and I think it also helps in terms of being able to identify how to speak to them. And so for me, I can move very easily from one thing to the next if it makes sense to me. And so I'm very logical. And so it's like if I have a fear that I'm going to get kidnapped, I'm going to go look at the crime stats to see how often are people getting kidnapped in my area. And if people aren't getting kidnapped in my area a lot, then I'm not going to. I'm like, well, um, that's an illogical thought, and so I'm not going to hold on to it, and I'll be able to let go of it and move on. And so sometimes I'm like, how do I get the client to do that same thing? And some of them who think like I do, I'm like, just run the numbers. It's okay. It's fine. The numbers do not support this thought. And so just let go of it.
Exactly. That almost makes me think about like really knowing like where your Mercury is, like how you communicate, how you think, how you process things. Like Gemini rising, like I process things very quickly, which I guess that could be good or bad, but knowing how a client is able to process how they communicate, how they kind of like, dissect things would be very helpful in our field.
Hmm. Um, I'm a Taurus rising. I remember in a previous episode you were talking about like holding grudges. And I always laugh because people like tell me all the time that I hold grudges. And I was like, I don't hold grudges. I was like, what I do is I see a person's behavior and I believe it. And until you prove to me that it's wrong or that they're a different person, then I'm going to always believe it. I was like, it's not a grudge. And people are like, that's a grudge. I was like, it's not a grudge. It is facts. And I'm just upholding and the facts. The evidence shows this, and in my logical brain, if the evidence shows that they're this way, then they're that way, and there's no gray. It's very black and white.
That's definitely relatable because I feel like most people do the opposite. Most people see potential in people, or they'll go, "Oh, they didn't mean that," but people show you better than they tell you. So it's like you really have to see what people are doing and take their actions for face values because I mean, the actions are just as valuable as the words and the nonverbal. Like everything is connected. So
Mhm.
I don't think that's a grudge.
Yeah. And you know what? When you say that, the in terms of the nonverbal, that's something that I tell people about myself all the time. Is that with that Virgo, Capricorn, Taurus, what you're going to see is I'm not going to tell you anything. I am not going to, I always say, I'm not a words of affirmation person. I'm not going to say good job or I'm proud of you or pat you on the back. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cook you a dinner. I'm going to buy you a gift. I'm going to give you a hug. I'm going to be there cheering you on. I'm never going to say congratulations, but I'm there clapping. And so it's always going to be that nonverbal for me. That's how I show any kind of emotions is through, usually for me it's acts of service or a gift. I love giving gifts. And so I'm going to do those things versus saying, "Oh, congratulations."
Yeah. And I think that's important to always consider like everyone loves naturally in their own unique way. Like certain things just come easy to people, and other love languages and other ways to show love is a little bit more difficult. So I think people being aware of that as well, and I'm pretty sure that they can see that in their birth chart if they're able to look at it. Because it's like I hear a lot of clients say like, why isn't my mother loving me the way that I want to be loved? And it's like, well, maybe she didn't know how, or maybe her environment, or maybe the things that she went through. So it's like things are so layered, but you can definitely get like a lot of answers by doing a little bit of research.
And that's one of the reasons why when people are like looking for partners, I always say you need to find somebody who loves you naturally the way that you need to be loved. Because, so much of who they are is kind of already scripted, it's already there, and then you're going to try to go in and say, "No, love me this way," and it's like that doesn't come natural for them. And what you're going to find out is that you're going to be constantly trying to coach them through loving you. They're not going to be consistent at it. But if you find somebody who loves you in the way that you like to be loved, then you're good. And so I always tell people, I was like, if you're a words of affirmation person, don't talk to me. But if you love like acts of service and gifts, I'm your person. I will be there and I will take care of all those things. But I am not going to say good job or pat you on your back. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. I also think it's really important with astrology is to like master your own birth chart first. See how you can increase your strengths or increase your weaknesses with your astrology chart. Because I notice a lot of people will use it for dating or trying to control other people. But it's like until you can use your birth chart and understand the inner workings of your world, it's going to be pretty difficult to kind of look at other people's stuff.
And the thing I think about also is that you have to be ready for your birth chart. And for me, so much of mine says that I'm going to be some amazing person. And so I have a lot of qualities of somebody who's going to be successful. And if you're not in the position to receive that yet, or you don't know where to take that, it can be really hard. And then you can feel like a failure. Now, me, and as I said before, that Virgo in me is like, "Oh, I'm already perfect. I'm so great. I know I can do these great things." I've always been like a business oriented person, get things done, come up with all these kind of ideas. And so when my chart says you're destined for greatness, I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know. Thanks for the reminder."
It's also nice because I feel like with your birth chart, it's transits, it's cycles. It
Mhm.
kind of shows that life is a journey. It's not a destination. So I think that's one thing to keep into account too, like being patient with yourself, being patient with others, knowing that everybody's life is unfolding over time. Because like you said, like me looking at my North Node in the 11th house, I'm like, why am I not like a great influencer making millions of dollars? Where's it at? But at least we know like little glimpses of like where we're going. But it's also just about, being present and being in the moment and just using astrology and zodiac signs as a tool,
Hmm.
not as a crutch.
Yeah. And I see it as knowing that I have something in me. And so it's like, I know that I have the ability to do this, but I also know that this will probably be an obstacle. And so because I know that this is going to be an obstacle, then I'm going to, prepare for that obstacle. I'm going to use other things that I know about myself to make a plan, to get organized, to set this up, because I'm probably going to run into something similar to this. And so it becomes this kind of like, okay, I know that these are the things that can happen. And I know that these are the qualities that I have. Now let me sit here and put this together and make a plan of action of how to approach these things.
It makes me just think about like how astrology on your birth chart is a blueprint. And we're not given all of the answers that, the universe doesn't make it that easy for us, but it's nice to know that we do have confirmation. And I think that that's another way that I like to look at astrology as confirmation. Notice that certain things don't fit or certain characteristics don't resonate with you, then let it go. Like, don't force certain characteristics that don't make any sense. That may be something that you kind of grow into over time.
I can see that in terms of like the confirmation thing. I was talking to a friend. I don't know what we were talking about, but we got to talking about Mars, and I was like, my Mars is like in Leo, and they were like, "Oh, that explains stuff." And I was like, "Wait, what? What do you mean by that?" And they were like, "Well, what you told me about how you were when you were younger, like the conquest that it was with certain parts of your life." And I was like, oh, okay. And so then I went and like did my own little research. I was watching these videos and I kind of bust out laughing. I was like, oh my gosh, that is so me. That's what I'm doing right now without even realizing that that's what I was doing.
I think it's pretty cool too to like utilize astrology with your kiddos. I think that that's amazing because I have three kids, and my middle one, she's a Virgo moon, and she cleans like no other. Like she was just born to clean, and I'm just like, wow, like I didn't even teach her that. Like I can't even take credit for that. So like knowing your kids' birth charts, I think that that would be really important. At least knowing their big three, because then like for their weaknesses, you can help them. My older and my youngest are Tauruses. Their rooms are a little messy. So I'm going to have to come in as mom and find tools for them and, organizational tools so I can help them instead of calling them lazy because Tauruses are notorious for being called lazy or stubborn. But Tauruses are actually very hard workers. Okay.
Mhm.
They just have to do things the way that they want to do things. And that's the thing that can kind of get tricky with zodiac signs and the stigmas that people put on them.
Yeah. And it makes me think about my Taurus rising, and you know me, I'm very much march to the beat of my own drums type of person. But then it also makes me think about how um, I can be very messy and I can be very clean. And so it's probably maybe that Taurus in me that has my desk looking a mess right now. But then all of a sudden I'll have a switch clicks on and that Virgo pops out and I'm sitting here organizing everything. And even like looking at my drawers, I have like two drawers on my desk and one has like all these little cute clear containers. Everything is perfectly organized in it. And then the other is the mess drawer. And it's just stuff that's just thrown in there. And it's like, my personality, like all of my signs show up in so many different areas of my life. But then it also makes me think about like when we take like the astrology and then we look at like the mental health, and it's like, is the mental health um just other signs from other houses showing up, or is the mental health like something exterior? Because I think about like my ADHD and I was like, that doesn't quite align very well with being a Virgo. And so I always tell people I'm very hot or I'm very cold. So I'm very focused, I'm very organized, I got it together, or I'm like, whoo, look at the squirrel.
For sure. And mental health can definitely show up in your birth chart. With being a Gemini rising, I've always been filled with a lot of nervous energy. There's just a lot of energy, and I feel like if if I'm not able to get that energy out, exercising, walking, then that would be anxiety. That would feel like overwhelm. So I think they're definitely tied together. You can
Mhm.
see those things if you're able to kind of pinpoint them.
Yeah. And I know my Gemini, I have Gemini in my North node, but then I also think about like I have a lot of Sagittarius placements, and I was like, I wonder if that has to do with my little my flightiness.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I can definitely relate to that. I always read about Sagittarius and it's like if you want to live a long life, work out. But I mean obviously that's for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah. So I really love looking at like all the different things that play into who we are, our expression of motion of emotions, how we understand ourselves, how we interact with others. It just really um, makes us very complex beings, and being able to really understand how complex we are, yet how simple we are at the same time.